We are rolling.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming over today. I'm honored to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for proper introduction,
Yep.
Chris Cooper is a distinguished political scientist, PhD professor at Western Carolina University, has an incredibly long list of accolades, more than I can even mention. He's written articles and or been quoted in a wide variety of publications, including the New York Times, Washington Post, the New Yorker, Raleigh News and Observer, National Public Radio, CNN, Fox News, and other outlets. His public writings have appeared all over the place, and for good reason. I did get to read your book, The North Carolina Purple State, The Anatomy of North Carolina as Politics, and it's great. I've really enjoyed that inside look of how we developed, where our divisions lie, where our common ground lies, how the structure of our politics has sometimes exacerbated those divisions. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start with that, and start with kind of your nutshell history of North Carolina politics, where we are now, and of course graduating that into national politics, since that's my focus.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me. And yeah, so I guess where we got to where we are as a state, I mean, North Carolina was so the whole South, right, was overwhelmingly Democratic for a very long time. And then we were never quite as Democratic as our neighbors were. And then the South, of course, turned very Republican. We didn't go quite as Republican as our neighbors did. We've been sitting in this kind of murky middle for a long time. And so I think that's what defines a lot of our politics. And sometimes if you're thinking, why is North Carolina politics seem so nasty sometimes? I think the reason is because it's so competitive, right? So if you're in Oklahoma and you're a Republican, there's no need to, do anything rash. You're in control of everything. You can slow roll all day long. You're a Democrat in California, same thing. But if you're trying to get power in North Carolina, you've got to act and act quickly, and sometimes with haste. And I think that's what creates a lot of the kind of nastier, more no-holds-barred politics we see in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, too, that some of the extremes of politics, both in-state and nationally, have pushed us to become defensive and to highlight those extremes, that it's a vicious cycle where, for example, I personally feel threatened by some of the actions of the current administration, and it causes me to want to push further left, further against them, and I have to actively hold myself back from doing that, try to find that rational middle ground, which I think is becoming increasingly harder to find in the state of partisan vitriol and in the state of genuine threats against democracy, and on the other side against values that conservatives hold dear as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think if we were talking to somebody on the right, they probably could tell you a very similar story, right?
Exactly.
Things they didn't like that were happening when Biden was president, when Harris was running for office, and so maybe they sort of ping-pong much more to the other side. And so, yeah, it's harder and harder to find that middle ground. I think our primary process leads to that in North Carolina and elsewhere, right?
Absolutely. In my perfect world, we wouldn't have primaries. We would have ranked choice voting. We would have some system to get on the ballot to where it's not 150 people on the ballot.
Sure.
But beyond that, let the people decide. Instead of having the party decide and having a primary decide, let's have the candidate that actually represents the people. And I think we would end up in that case with more moderate candidates and candidates who are better at getting along with each other in Congress.
Yeah, could very well be, right? And you probably know this. We actually had ranked choice voting a little bit in North Carolina.
I did not know that.
So Cary, North Carolina, and Hendersonville both experimented with ranked choice voting a number of years ago and had it for, I think it was 2 cycles.
Yeah.
It got pretty good reviews in Hendersonville, not so good in Cary,
Okay.
but then it just sort of died as an experiment. It's never been revived.
Oh, that's too bad. I think it could be helpful.
Yeah.
I think that there have been times when candidates who could have won for the Democratic Party lost in the primary because they didn't meet the litmus test of are you liberal enough, are you Democratic enough? And so in this case, the Democratic primary voters gave up an opportunity to have someone who would champion their core ideals because they were also fighting for these less popular ideas that pushed away the independents and the light conservatives.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. Again, I think it's probably true on the Republican side as well. The primary voter is not the same thing as the general election voter.
Exactly.
So the primary voter, tends to have different ideas about, what they want out of their candidate. And so sometimes then you end up with kind of candidates from the extremes.
Yeah. Speaking for myself and speaking from what I know of the other current primary candidates in this District 11 race, as far as I know, all 4 of us are pushing in most ways for a more central message. I think that the Democratic Party as a whole is getting the overall message that we are losing on certain issues, and that we're going to continue to lose if we continue to press those issues, and that we can hold our core ideals as humans, as Democrats, without necessarily pushing so far that we push ourselves out of the race. And that's the balance that I'm looking for. I feel like I happen to fall in the right place to do it. my own personal philosophy is a bit more central on some issues and a bit more conciliatory. However, I strongly believe in the right to free speech, the right to be who you are, to love who you love, and the right to be able to express yourself in the ways you want to, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. And I do feel like some of those rights are threatened, and I feel like part of that threat comes not from the sentiment of the right against us, but the extremes and the reactions to what they see as an anti-religious and what they see as an anti-freedom pressure on our part. So my hope in politics is to bring us towards the middle a bit, to learn to get along, and to realize that as Americans, on the actual issues of the nuts and bolts of how the economy works, how taxation works, how power should be distributed, we are largely in agreement. I feel, however, that our differences have allowed a small cadre of billionaires, dark money interests, to push us apart and to kind of take more than their share. I think taxation is a great example. You look at taxation, and something like 80% of Americans are in favor of closing tax loopholes for millionaires and billionaires. 80%. But it doesn't happen because the millionaires and billionaires are the ones giving the big campaign donations. They're the ones making things happen, and they're the ones in control. And I think as long as we let them control things, and as long as we leave that system in, we're going to keep having a system where the middle class has a pretty heavy tax burden, and millionaires with good accountants have a very low tax burden.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks probably feel that way. And I think that's going to be interesting to watch kind of how that plays out in your primary, how that's going to play out in the Republican primary, how that's going to play out in the general election too, right? So we're having all these conversations about tax policy nationally. They're also having them right now in Raleigh. And so we've got this, big national conversation about the budget going on. We also have still no state budget coming out of Raleigh.
That's right.
So very much of it is that conversation about what is the proper rate of taxation, what should this look like?
Yeah, I was over there yesterday actually doing a little bit of lobbying with Red Wine and Blue, and a lot of the reps I talked to weren't that optimistic about getting a budget figured out because they realize we need money and we need taxes to do it, and the idea of raising taxes is so unpopular. And with our North Carolina taxes, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, we don't have as much room and options to close loopholes. I feel like the solution is actually simpler nationally because we have these very generous loopholes that allowed me in 2019 to pay an 8% federal tax rate despite substantial income, and there are people who made much more and paid much less. And with that, I feel like there's room for improvement. In North Carolina, it seems to be more complex.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And this is the key, right? I mean, whether somebody is left, right, or center is understanding exactly how the federal system works versus how the state system works versus how these local systems work too, right? And I think it's hard. It's hard for citizens to follow this stuff and try to understand exactly who they need to go for to get, the benefits that they want out of government because it's a complicated system.
And I've had some conversations with some prominent Democratic candidates, Democratic politicians, and it's been actually pretty discouraging, their take on if and how we can fix the campaign finance system. And do you have any thoughts on that? We understand the power of Citizens United, but it seems like there was some invitation to legislate against that. And what do you think is the possible path for focusing power more on individual people and reducing the power of the wealthy?
I wish I had good news, right? I think everybody would like good
did
news here.
Too.
But
Yes.
I just don't. I think, it's Citizens United. And yes, of course, that was huge. But there was actually a decision before that, Buckley versus Vallejo, that essentially said money is speech. And once money is speech, then you don't want to limit somebody's speech, right? And so the idea then is you don't want to limit the way somebody spends their money. And so I think the problem, yes, Citizens United exacerbated it and increased some of this big money, but it was here even before then. And I don't really, unfortunately, see a great option to change things.
You think it would take, a full 2/3 majority and a constitutional change to do it, or is it not quite that heavy
even
to change
then,
it?
I think it might be even more difficult, right? I mean, as long as the courts are saying to limit your money is to limit your speech, then I don't really understand what the solution is, right? So what do we need to think about? Part of what we need to think about is disclosure standards and making sure that everything is disclosed and that there are real penalties for non-disclosure. I think those are some of the things that we can actually control.
It's a step that we could do.
Exactly. And I wish there was a great solution to just, get rid of Citizens United or, decide that money isn't speech. But the courts have been pretty consistent on that, and I don't see a lot of movement coming.
But with that concept of money being speech, I'm only allowed to donate $3,500 to a candidate.
That's right.
I personally, and that's enforced.
That's right.
So my thought is that my first move would be to introduce legislation to put the same standards on me, on a special interest group, on a corporation, to where you wouldn't have a PAC that can spend $50 million spending an election in their favor. You'd instead have a PAC that could donate $3,500, the same as I can. That would be something I would think could go through, because it wouldn't challenge the money as speech concept. It would just challenge the concept that one organization's speech can drown out the individual speech of hundreds or thousands of individual voters. So to me, it would be a preservation of free speech to even the score on that. But it sounds like even that concept may not fly as well as I think it would.
I think it'd be tough, right? I mean, the limiting the money, yeah, I think that is absolutely doable. Some of that, as you noted very well, has already been done. But if, I'm running a group called Citizens Against Mountain Bike Accidents. I just went over the handlebars a few minutes ago.
That was rough. I'm so glad you're okay. You guys wouldn't believe what this guy looked like an hour ago. He was completely covered in mud and poison ivy, and had thankfully destroyed a large portion of the poison ivy that was threatening that part of the trail. Thank you very much. I didn't think you needed to use your face to do it, but you did a good job there. You took out your share of poison ivy for the day.
Try to contribute to other folks. But yeah, so let's say I've got this now very well named organization, Citizens Against Mountain Bike Accidents, and I decide I want to run an ad. Like, you can stop me from giving you money, yes, but can you stop me from spending $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 in support of a campaign to make sure that we don't have those kind of features on the trail anymore?
Right.
That's the money is speech.
And next on the docket is how do I do this? How do I win? And then we'll get into what do I do if I win. But I don't get to do anything if I don't win.
That's right.
This is an R+5 district per the Cook Political Report. And that's already factoring in demographic changes. It's already factoring in people's frustration with the current administration. It's going to be a tough uphill climb. Yeah. So what do I do? How do I pull this off?
I mean, it is going to be tough, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. It is, two things are true at the same time. One, it's the most competitive district in the state that's currently held by a Republican. Like, that's a fact. And at the same time, if somebody won this district at an R+5, it would be the biggest upset in the country, right? So both things are true at the same time. That's how uncompetitive our congressional districts are. But it's also a district that's been moving more towards the Democratic Party. So there are only, I think it's 19 districts in the entire United States, 435 districts. 19 of them moved away from Trump the last two cycles. The 11th is one of them. The 11th moved away from Trump, the third most of any district in the country.
Okay.
So there's this sort of look, you say, maybe it's competitive, but at the same time, it's a stretch. I don't know, it's sort of like, it's sort of like shoulder season in the mountains. Like, do you need a jacket or not? Like, can a Democrat win or not? I don't really know.
Yeah.
So it's going to be close, right? What needs to happen? I mean, obviously I don't know exactly, but I can tell you what hasn't happened in the past, and that would
be very helpful.
Any Democrat winning any district that doesn't start with a B and end in an Uncombe, right? They win Buncombe County and they lose everything else in the West. And the last district that somebody won in NC11 county outside of Buncombe the 11th was Jackson County, and it's been a while since that happened, right? So that was, I think, Hayden Rogers in 2012. So it's been a long time. So I think what a Democrat has to do is, yes, of course, a Democrat's going to win Buncombe, but a Democrat has to cut into the Republican lead in Henderson, cut in Madison, and figure out another place out west to do much better, because the Democrats keep getting killed in everything else except Buncombe, then the Democrats are going to lose. And that's tough, right? We have multiple media markets. If you're way out west, you're getting your news from Chattanooga. So and you can't get the Asheville Citizen-Times delivered to your door. So it's not like there's one cure-all to go to. Yeah. It's really hard, and it's a big space. If you've driven out west a bunch of times to go boating and do other things, but if you drive to the Chiowa from here, it's going to take a while, right? And so to hit all these spots in all these small towns is just really tough. And in some ways, I think, frankly, it's tougher sometimes from somebody from Buncombe County, just because they're not known as much outside of their home county.
And we're considered other.
That's right.
There is this kind of, urban versus rural, us versus them mentality that a lot of the political operatives have been capitalizing on.
That's right.
And spreading out and making worse, and it definitely doesn't serve us well in District 11.
No, I think it's definitely not serving the Democrats well. I don't think it's serving people well in general, regardless of partisanship, right? I mean, there is a very clear divide. It didn't used to be true, right? There was a time, 2000, Buncombe County voted for George W. Bush for president, right? The Republican candidate for president. Way out west, Swain County, at some stages, they were voting for Democrats. So, but now we've perfectly sorted. Where you got blue counties and red counties, and for the most part, the blue counties are getting bluer, the red are getting redder. And so for a Democrat to win here, they've got to reverse that trend.
Yeah, it's a frightening trend too. Like, what do you think as far as, not only changing our platform to make sure we are serving rural America, but also changing our messaging to make sure that they know we're serving rural America?
Yeah.
Because there are certain issues that, from my Democratic perspective, I feel like the current Republican-led administration is hurting them, especially on some of the taxation stuff and some of the aid stuff, the Medicaid cuts and the cuts to SNAP that a lot of these people are dependent on, and they still largely support these actions and the politicians behind them. So I think we have two things, and we need to make sure that we're serving their needs, and we need to make sure that they know we are serving their needs and that we can regain their trust.
Yeah,
and I think that's the big uphill battle.
Yeah, I think it is going to be an uphill battle. And I think part of what has to happen is Democrats need to show up, and they need to show up in these red places, just like Republicans need to show up in blue places, right? I mean, so much of it is, it's hard to tell people you care about them if they don't see you.
Right.
And I think that's a big piece of it. That's not, you need fancy statistics for that. You don't need any sort of demographic profile. It's just simple humanity, and I think it applies to both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a large part of my plan, is to put another 30,000 miles or so on my beat-up old Honda Civic and drive to every little town in western North Carolina and talk to anyone who will listen and try to regain their trust in the Democratic Party, or at least give them the option to see some of the specific things we can do to make their lives better.
Yeah, I think that's... the candidates who have done the best, I think that's what they have tended to do. And the last, recent history of Western North Carolina, that has tended to be Republican candidates who have been able to pull that off. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this race in the primary, obviously, but also in the general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easier as a Republican to get the invitations to do that. I think that there is such a divide that it's going to be tough for me, or potentially for any Democrat, to get the invites to speak at these clubs, these fire stations, these town halls, and to get people to show up. I think that we are so polarized that we label each other and we discount what the other side has to say. And I'll admit, I've been guilty of it for decades, and it's only in the past few years where I'm realizing that win or lose, that mentality is bad for America. That I need to listen with an open ear to people who are in the middle, people who are right of me, people who voted for Trump, whatever. I need to actually listen to their reasons for doing so. And I'm finding that some of them are things that I think we can address as a Democratic Party. The two specific things that I hear that I think we as Democrats can definitely do better on are immigration and crime control. That we look at the left edge of the Democratic Party, which is, we're very vocal about a very open immigration policy, and then you look at the majority of Americans who prefer controlled borders and legal immigration and limited legal immigration. And to me, this is something that isn't a core ideal that we need to fight for. This is something that we can go with the will of the American people. My view happens to be there. It's not something I have to change my view on. I believe that we need secure borders. I believe there are dangers outside of America that we need to defend against. I believe that we should use immigration as a tool to make America stronger. We should be strategic about who we invite. We should invite people who will make America stronger and bring in the best and brightest of the world to make us stronger. We should also, on that same token, have compassionate entry for people who really need it, people who have fought for democracy, people who are under the gun of gang warfare. And obviously we can't save all of these people. We can't bring all of them into America, because then we sink the lifeboat. But I believe that we can bring in a number of them, and that they would be grateful for that opportunity. And that paired with a very selective, strategic immigration policy can let immigration make America much stronger while having secure borders. And when I have this conversation with people who voted for Trump, they tend to agree with me on this. So when I think of this, I don't understand why the Democratic Party needs to be losing votes on immigration when we can have an immigration policy that balances compassion with increasing American power and secures our borders. And the other issue is crime control, where I've lived in heavily Democratic-controlled cities, and it's not that pleasant. And I say that with stark honesty, that there is a large part of the Democratic Party who so cares about individual humanity, which is commendable, that they want to preserve the rights of the accused, the rights of people who have committed crimes, at the expense of preserving the rights of their victims. And I think that in a lot of these cities, that car break-ins and assaults are out of control, and it makes them bad places to live. And it's something that we as Democrats have developed a reputation for. And it's something I don't think we need. I think we need to be fair about crime and punishment, and we need to respect victim rights just as much as we respect the rights of those who have broken the law. So I think those two issues are big ones that we can change, but there are a lot of others. And I think that for some of the others, it's more misperception. And that's kind of the next thing I want to ask you about is how the Republican conservative media machine has done such a good job of painting the Democrats as being bad on the economy. That's the one specific thing where I think they're wrong. When you look at the track record of Democratic presidents versus Republicans, Democratic presidents tend generally to improve the economy with their policies. And, Democratic leadership tends to strengthen the middle class, strengthen education, strengthen infrastructure, all the things that I want as a capitalist and as an investor and as a very amateur economist. So that's one I want to ask you about is how do you think we can get hold of the spin machine and try to get it back towards the center a little bit where people are looking at the actual economy and the actual numbers?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's interesting, right? So I like to have a lot of conversations with folks on the left and the right, and when I have conversations with folks on the right, they think the opposite is true, right? They think that it is a left-wing spin machine and that they're not understanding that. So I think the economy is interesting, right? Because at any given time, I think there's probably two things going on at the same time. So let's think about the Biden administration.
Okay.
Inflation was up. Like, that is a fact.
Yeah.
We can
and
say
Biden made it worse.
Well, in that part, I think folks
opinion,
would disagree on.
Biden absolutely made inflation worse.
And I'll stop there just because that's why you're running for office and I'm not. But I think that's a fair point, right? So we do know that inflation went up then. At the same time, there were some good things going on in the economy. So what do you want to emphasize, right? And I think that's the key is that most of us are tending to see things through our lens, right? If you tend to like Biden, you say, well, yeah, inflation's up a little, but still look what's happening with the market. And then if you are on the right, you say, yeah, the market's going well, but let's look at these crazy inflation numbers.
It's bad.
Right? And so I think that's what's tough about the economy is there is no one the economy. It's all of these inconvenient facts put together, and it's a matter of
focus on the facts that favor our mindset.
Right,
it's
of
our
course,
nature as humans.
Absolutely.
I think the one, if there's one, and again, this is my opinion. If there's one falsitude, in my opinion, that I could break down, it's trickle-down economics. There is a strong belief among a lot of people that if we make millionaires and billionaires richer, then they start more businesses, they run more money into the economy, they pay people more, they spend more money, and the actual economic research that I've read from a lot of different varieties doesn't hold true with that.
Yeah.
If you give somebody who makes $1 million a year an extra $100,000, they might spend it. They might buy a little nicer yacht that year, but they're probably just going to stick it in the bank and put it in some investment. It's not going to circle right back into the economy. You give somebody who makes $50,000 a year, another $5,000, that's running right back into the economy. And this is something that I think that the economists aren't being listened to. That I read economic reports, I read books written by economists, and they consistently say that a strong middle class and 40 in economics is the way to make everyone richer. And I feel like I can speak to that even as an investor, even as someone who the system has done really well for, that my ability to make money as a businessman, as an investor, is based on two things. Having people who have the skills to do the work I need to get done, and having people who can afford to buy the products that I create with that work. So to me, trickle-down economics serves neither of those purposes, but I believe there is a very strong and common public misperception that trickle-down economics works and that we should keep moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, this is what campaign should be about, right, is this conversation. And what I love to see is whoever the Democratic candidate is against whoever the Republican candidate is, likely Chuck Edwards in this case, have this conversation in front of people and just and let the voters decide. That's how the system is supposed to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is hard, though, when, using the economics as an example, there is a lot of news media that is false. And I'm going to say that for both sides. And I've fallen prey to reposting and positively commenting on liberal propaganda that bends the truth, omits facts, because I'm so defensive and so freaked out about what the other side is doing that I think I need all the power I can to push in my direction. And I see it happening on both sides. I'm not going to try to point fingers more at one than the other, but I do think either way that this falsity, this acceptance of false news, and this tendency to promote news that promotes our views is horribly dangerous and prevents us from making rational decisions that further our economy and our strength as a nation.
Yeah.
So what do you think about breaking that down? How do we get into the emotions, the minds of people, and help them be more open-minded to more central and factual news sources?
It's really tough, right? I think social media makes it so much tougher. I mean, that's not the stuff that makes you click, and therefore that's not the stuff that brings people cash on the barrelhead.
That's right.
And so
that basic central reality is kind of boring.
It is, and it takes time, right? It's complicated, and so even if you're a nerd and you find this stuff interesting, you just have to work at it.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to get the dopamine hit of I knew I was right the whole time.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is about how we have been training our minds for the last 20 years to just get things off social media, and that there's not a grand solution for that, right? I don't think it's incumbent on individuals to really take their attention span seriously and to take their news sources more seriously. But I mean, I'd ask people to check dates. It sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but I'm sure you've seen it. I see it all the time. Somebody reposts something and it was from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And you think, well, that's not really what's happening now at all.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there's a great institutional solution. I think it's going to come to some collectively we've got to figure out that we've got a problem and then work towards a solution. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's what people are trying to do in this environment.
Yeah, it does seem scary. The other thing that really scares me is free speech. It's something that I feel like both sides have inhibited in some ways, but I am going to make a partisan statement in this case that the current Republican Trump-led administration is pushing much harder against free speech, specifically with their actions against law firms that have supported lawsuits against the Trump administration, their actions against Harvard and other schools, where these schools have allowed free speech, perhaps to a greater extent than they should in certain cases, but the extreme reprisals are quelling free speech. And some people say, oh, that's imaginary, that's not really happening. It is really happening. I've so far had 3 people who've refused to have these conversations with me because they're afraid of reprisals. They're afraid that someone in the Trump administration is going to get Doge after their job or their father's job or their brother's job, or is going to start a smear campaign against them. And this is just in the early start of this campaign that 3 people already who strongly believe in having these discussions and furthering the cause have been afraid to do so. So the problem is real. So what do you think about this? To me, it's the scariest thing.
Right.
And it is the thing that prompted me to run. This fear that free speech is being impinged and that the fabric of our democracy is unraveling before our eyes.
I mean, look, obviously I hate that anybody would feel like they can't have a conversation, sit down and have a reasonable conversation. And I see, you're doing these conversations. Mo Davis, who's obviously running against you, or you're always in the same field, is running his own podcast and is having conversations with people. I think Chuck Edwards has conversations on camera with people. This is what we should be doing. And it is sad that people are scared. And I hear from people on the right sometimes, and it's not a both sides thing always. I'm not saying things are balanced, but I am saying I hear from folks on the right that they too feel like they can't say some of the things that they want to say as well. And so, it is.
It goes on both sides. I mean, the reaction of the liberal side against conservative speech is very strong. I mean, the shutting down businesses and the public ridicule and the yelling and chasing people out of towns, it's real. It's on both sides.
Yeah.
My stronger fear is what the current administration is doing with it on a more institutional level, getting the FBI involved and getting legal access involved. But you're right, the problem's on both sides.
Yeah. And so, I think what do we need to do? We need to be more comfortable having open conversations about politics in a reasonable and reasoned way. And, it's hard. I think there are folks who are trying to do that, but again, it's not easy. It's not as clickable. It's not going to make you feel quite as good about yourself, and it's not going to reinforce everything you believe. And let's look at MSNBC and Fox News. There was a time where they both had actual news, and now it is mostly commentary. It is mostly commentary that reinforces the pre-existing beliefs of people who are watching it.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame that what's happened there. But I think I get why. It's an economic decision. They're trying to, if they can get more clicks and more eyeballs and therefore more advertising dollars by doing that.
And I guess you're right that there's not an institutional solution.
Right.
Because anything you try to do to fix that is in itself an impingement on free speech.
That's right.
I do think that we should do a better job of labeling that, that we should indicate what is news and what is opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And even in news where there isn't falsehood, but there is omission,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should have a better ability as people to look at the whole story. In my perfect world, we would have some sort of central registry that was just fact-based and would say, yes, these parts of this story are true. These parts may not be true according to these sources of this information. These parts are left out. This is relevant information that was left out of this NPR story because it doesn't further this liberal view. These are relevant pieces of information that were left out of this Fox News story because it doesn't support this conservative view. In my perfect world, we would have something like that. It would have to be private. The government couldn't be involved in it. An example to me is you look at Charity Navigator, which does this same thing for charities, which it looks at their efficiency and their effectiveness. It doesn't look at their purpose. It doesn't say, oh, this charity is doing something you don't want. It just says, this charity is spending money well. Right. Their salaries are reasonable. Their overhead costs are reasonable. I would love to see something like that you could kind of click into easily from any news source and say, hey, here is this very central and purely fact-based viewpoint that is probably going to bother you and you're not going to like it if you are on either extreme. And one way to test that would be if both extremes don't object to it, it's probably somewhat wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice.
It's just an idea. It's a pipe dream. But I do wish we had something like this that we could refer to.
And if people could be more intentional about how they're gathering news. I think most of us now get news not because we're seeking it out, but because it comes as a byproduct of something else, right? You're trying to look at Facebook to see pictures of your friends' kids, and then you get inundated with politics. And this is part of the problem, too, I think, of social media, where, when we used to actually get a newspaper and it would be delivered in the morning, and you had a section labeled opinion. Well, they still have that, but people have lost that cue, right? There were all these cues that we were getting from papers. You knew the back of this one section. Before. That's right.
Yes.
And it still is, but that's not the way we receive it. We receive it in the same funnel of feed.
That absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. So I think that's become more, like I was noticing the other day, people were complaining about something written in the opinion section of the Charlotte Observer, saying, well, the reporters shouldn't be having these kind of opinions. Well, it was in the opinion section.
It's America.
Right?
Have whatever opinion you want.
That's right. But they didn't realize which section it was in. And I think that has been a byproduct of the sort of the social media landscape.
Yeah. Wanted to ask you about political violence. Yeah. We had this recent assassination in Minnesota, which has me scared. Yep. Has Natalie and the kids scared. And probably is going to have a lot of people not deciding to run for office. And they're probably going to be some of the people who need to be running for office. Yeah. And that's terrifying. So, yes, speak to that, if you will. It's a tough subject.
It's awful.
Tell us what you think as a political scientist, where we're at on that as a nation.
It seems like our appetite for political violence is unfortunately growing. In other words, people are becoming more and more. So surveys that study, people who study this and they do surveys year after year say, is there any circumstance in which you'd be willing to engage in this kind of political violence? And the proportion is small, but it's growing, of people who say, yes, it's sometimes acceptable.
That's
and
scary.
It's incredibly scary, right? And so we've got these one-off things. So the Minnesota, obviously, assassination. We have 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. So they're coming. One of the things that scared me the most after the Minnesota one was this immediate fight over whether the perpetrator was liberal or conservative, right? And so you've got a U.S. senator, Mike Lee in this case, Republican, who came out and made some tweet or post saying that he thought this person was a Marxist, I think, in his terms. And then, of course, you had folks on the left saying, no, this person is obviously a Trump supporter. And the fact that we're having that conversation at all is so problematic to me, right? I mean, as if an assassin somehow speaks for a party or an ideology. I mean, this is somebody who's a madman by definition. And it really concerns me, the quick move to, it's your fault. And that definitely, we saw that. And so that's what scared me. I don't want to say the most. Obviously, the death scares me the most. Right. The assassination attempt. But it scares me also the rhetoric that comes after.
Yeah, that is really scary. And I haven't even thought about that side of it, where how we frame this matters so much for future perpetrators,
Yep.
for people who are trying to make a statement. And it really, to me, is a terrorist action.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not, that person's purpose. Yeah, they're trying to bend the legislature of that state in a direction. But the real purpose of that sort of action is to scare people, to keep people from running for office.
That's right.
Keep people from diving into the system. And, again, I think we need people who are good, who are strong, and who are running. And that's definitely going to hurt us on that front. It's a hard thing to fight. I mean, I know we have the FBI designed to fight political violence, and we have these arguments about weaponizing the FBI in one direction or the other. My hope is that the FBI can continue to keep tabs on chat boards, on places where people get radicalized, keep an eye on people who are buying guns who haven't bought them before, people who could commit these acts of political violence, and hopefully stop them before they get to this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my hope as well. And I think, look, that happens, right? I mean, you got to figure how many of these have been stopped that we have no idea about. In some ways, that's even scarier, right? Is to know that there were others. At the same time, I would assume the FBI has stopped some of those. So that's the positive, right? But yeah, it's incredibly terrifying. And look, most people's information is pretty out there right now. So in North Carolina, you can look up anybody's at least mailing address with one click on the state voter file. Yeah, it's not so hard to find.
Yeah, it's scary.
And the degree to which somebody's going to get doxxed is one thing, but these kind of violent attempts is completely another.
Do you think that there is a concerted effort by either internal bad actors or foreign powers to stoke this division and increase this violence? I ask that because I happened to be staying at a hotel for a few days where they had Russian television playing in the wake room. And Russian television is Russia's America propaganda machine, labeled as Russian television, not trying to hide it. Their whole spiel was sowing distrust in America and sowing adversarial animosity between both sides. They would alternate very conservative and very pro-liberal stories and pitch them against each other with this message that the other side is extreme, the other side is bad, they hate you, your government is not working. And these were very well made, very just incredibly persuasive programs that were obviously and clearly a foreign influence trying to get us at each other's throats. My thought is there's probably a lot more of that going on behind the scenes, that a lot of the bots, a lot of the comments you see online are probably foreign interests.
Yeah.
Or are, dark money interests who are trying to divide us to make it easier to control us. What do you think about that angle of things? Is this me being paranoid? Is this something that may actually be happening?
Yeah, I don't think it's you being paranoid at all. I think in terms of political violence, I don't know that I see that as the cause, but there's no question that foreign actors are trying to influence American politics. I mean, in some ways, they'd be fools not to, right? I mean, if you're trying to exercise power on the world stage, wouldn't you want to control American public opinion?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that is clearly happening. I don't think that's paranoia. I think that is fact. I don't know that I see a lot of connection to the violence piece, but I definitely do see a connection to the information that we keep coming back to, this sort of bad information environment that we're in. Yeah, absolutely. They're playing along.
I feel like, and where I see that connection is I feel like some of this intentional division, the us versus them, that side's bad, I think that's the seed of that violence.
Could be.
That's where the radicalism starts, and that's where people lean towards that political violence.
Yeah.
So I certainly hope to see less of that. I feel like it's a destabilizing influence and obviously a bad thing for American politics. Switching topics, if you don't mind, what do you think about the big, beautiful bill?
Sure.
I've been ranting against this thing, running ads on YouTube, on Vibe, anywhere else I can get them, against this bill because I believe it's a power grab by the wealthy. I believe it's going to cut needed services for everyday Americans. There's a lot more in that bill other than those couple of things that I'm focusing on.
Sure.
What's your evaluation of it? What do you think the actual mechanics of it? What's it going to do for everyday people as far as taxes, economy, government services?
I mean, I think this is it's very much in the eye of the beholder, right? And this is, look, the number of people commenting on the Big Beautiful Bill and the number of people who have read the Big Beautiful Bill, there's very little overlap between those two, right?
Yes.
People have an opinion on this thing that they don't
right.
understand. Members of Congress probably haven't read it, right?
Yeah.
Many members of Congress will say, they can't read every bill that comes before them.
Right.
So I don't know to me, this is what a lot of budget bills, including this one, are predictions for what will happen in the future. If we make this tweak, here's what we think is going to happen. And we're seeing a lot of disagreements, obviously. What I find fascinating about it, though, is you've got this odd place where the left is opposed to it, but some folks on the far right are also opposed to it. And that's what I find the most interesting about the big, beautiful bill. Of course, you've got Trump for it, Democrats are against it.
Yeah.
When it's people like Rand Paul, perhaps, going against it, I don't know, it's a fascinating thing. And I think if it were easy to get that thing through, it'd be law by now, right? I mean, pretty clearly, this may not ever become law, and we're seeing the same kind of thing in Raleigh. So their fiscal year is about to end June 30th. I'm not sure when this will air, but it's almost certain that we're not going to have a state budget by then. That's the norm now. We tend to not get state budgets till later, but it appears in the last couple of days we may not get a state budget, period. They may decide to just hold the old budget and pass what they call mini budgets because the Republican House and the Republican Senate can't agree with each other. And so there's this kind of interesting thing at the state level and the federal level where there's this within party disagreement that may make it so we end up with no bill at all.
One of the consistent complaints I got from the Democratic representatives I spoke to yesterday when I was lobbying in Raleigh was that they say, and I perhaps agree with this from my Democratic perspective, that the Republicans are holding Hurricane Helene relief hostage as part of the negotiations for the overall bill. That they refuse to allow a standalone hurricane relief bill to pass because it's leverage for them to force the Democrats to agree with them enough to pass their overall budget bill. Are you seeing that, or do you have a different perspective on that one?
No, I think that's definitely one of the things that's happening. I think the difference is it depends if you're talking about the Senate or the House, right? Because they're the ones who are not in agreement. So Sidney Batch, who is the minority leader in the Senate, she said she was going to try to do this, what they call a discharge petition.
Yes,
so what this
4 o'clock yesterday, they said they were going to try to do that.
Exactly.
I haven't heard of whether it worked.
Yeah, so I think it did in a lot of ways, in that the majority leadership came out and said, okay, essentially, don't do that. No need to do this discharge petition. We're going to move this thing forward. So they moved it to a different committee, which then starts the 10 days over again, right? So who's using it as leverage? Somebody is. But in this case, I don't know that it is the one party using it against the other, sort of one chamber using it against another. So there's this old adage, this old adage politics. It's very different, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a line that says the other party is the opposition, the other chamber is the enemy, right? The idea that it's this between chamber fight, and I think that's a little bit of what's happening here, right?
Perspective, like the whole South Carolina versus Clemson thing,
right? Exactly.
These local sports teams that are close, they fight a whole lot harder than the team over the state line.
That's right. NC State versus UNC, or whatever it may be, and yeah, I think we are seeing that right now between the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate. Josh Stein, the Democratic governor, said he loves the House. Well, he didn't say he loves it, but he says, I'll vote for, I will not veto the House budget.
Right.
Senate budget's a different story.
Oh, okay. On Helene.
Yeah.
What do you think about the state and federal response to Helene? I had a good long conversation with my buddy Lance Buskey, who runs the Helene Cooperative Recovery Organization. He had some great thoughts on this, but he's not really involved in the political side. What he saw on the ground was his thought that, yes, FEMA was trying, yes, FEMA was helping. No, they did not do what they should have done, and no, they definitely didn't do what they should have done as fast as they could have done it if they were well organized and ready to respond.
Yeah, I certainly would not challenge anybody on the ground doing that kind of relief work. I mean, my sense is that's probably right. I don't know exactly what should have happened, right? So in this case, I'm sort of cursing the darkness but not casting any light.
Yeah. And that's where I'd like to move with this is, what do you think moving forward? Like, there's this thought of just abandoning FEMA, setting it on fire and ditching it. And there's this thought of pulling it out of the ditch and getting it back aligned and getting it back on the road and hitting the gas. And what's your thoughts there? Do we need something other than FEMA? Do we need to tune up FEMA? Do we need to get it more responsive, faster?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost everybody agrees. I think some tweaks are necessary, or at least beneficial. Yeah. But, it's one thing to tweak. It's another thing to throw it out. And I don't know that there is a lot of appetite for that. I mean, it's pretty interesting. Chuck Edwards put out this, I think 67-page report about the FEMA response and just the federal government response in general in Western North Carolina and what should be done about it. And I'm not saying everybody should love it, but it was thoughtful. And I would like to see, frankly, more conversation about what's in that. Like, let's actually have a substantive conversation about what he laid out. But that's not what happened, right? Sort of was covered that he filed this report, and that's about the last we've talked about it. So I'd love to see in this election. Our elections are a lot of things. They're about getting votes, obviously. You want to win, or else you wouldn't be running. But they're also a forum for discussion. And what better place and time to have a discussion about how we can think about disaster relief going forward than right here where Helene took place in the 11th Congressional District.
And hopefully to set a precedent of not being afraid to use the ideas that Chuck Edwards has researched, to see the good in them, even though he and I have substantial disagreements on how we believe we should run our part of the nation in Western North Carolina. That doesn't mean everything he says or does is wrong.
That's right.
And I think there is this perception of extremism that, that came from Chuck Edwards, it has to be terrible. And, where I think, let's look at it.
Yeah.
Let's look at it with open eyes, because he's put a lot of effort into this thing and he knows a lot about it. And let's find the good ideas in that and try to further them. I feel like in Chuck Edwards' case that he does want to help North Carolina recover from Helene. I feel like his hands are tied. His boss, the Trump administration, can fire him with a single tweet, sending someone in to primary him out. So Chuck Edwards can't really say anything when Trump is standing right next to him, lambasting FEMA and saying we need to pull all funding out of FEMA and not keep putting money into this North Carolina recovery. Chuck is just standing there like a sheep looking at him, not because he wants to be that sheep, but because Trump can fire him super easily. And so that's kind of, one of my main leverage points is that I don't have to try to paint Chuck Edwards as the devil. I don't like many of the things he's done. I don't like his dependence on corporate donors and the laws he's passed to favor them. I don't like his participation in the Big Beautiful Bill or his proud vote for it. But I think the biggest issue is that his hands are tied and that we need somebody who can support Western North Carolina, who's unfettered, who represents only North Carolina and not an administration that doesn't want to put more money into this continued recovery, which we need. What do you think are the points of division where the Democratic Party could move towards the center without compromising our ideas? Because this is my focal point. I want to pull over that 2.5% of voters away from Chuck over the Democratic side. I want to do that without losing any of the Democratic voters that I also need to show up and vote in this election if we're going to have any chance of winning. So what's your thought? If you imagine yourself being a Democratic strategist, I know that you're nonpartisan, you're a professional, but if you were to give advice to a Democratic strategist, what issues would you say we need to bend our platform on, we need to speak differently on, we need to do differently to win without compromising the base core ideas?
Sure. Yeah, to me, maybe it's less about platform and more like, just to return what we talked about before, about showing up. I think there is a perception, so I'm going to argue it's not real, and that's fine, but there is a perception that the Democrats haven't necessarily showed up for folks in the rural parts of the district. The Democrats haven't showed up for folks in the rural parts of the state. There's a perception that the Democrats have talked down to many of these people who have less education. Think about when Madison Cawthorn was running for office. A lot of reasons that folks did and probably should have ripped on Madison Cawthorn. The fact that he worked at Chick-fil-A was not one of them, right? But yet much of the rhetoric was mocking him. Chick-fil-A's a good job, right?
I feel the same against Chuck Edwards. Let's send him back to McDonald's and make him flip burgers. Like, no, man, he's a politician. Like, let's at least respect that he's putting some effort into the game and put a lot of thought into this. Even if we don't like his politics, let's not attack him as a person. Let's attack the policy.
And let's certainly not attack McDonald's. Here's somebody who, not by no means am I giving a Chuck Edwards campaign speech, but here's somebody who did grow up poor and worked his way up without going to college to manage and now own a series of McDonald's. It is, say what you want about his politics, that's the American dream.
It's a respectable success story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to mock him for McDonald's, I think, is tone deaf, because for most, or at least many folks working in this district, actually most people in this district, that would be financial success beyond their wildest dreams. Yeah. And so I think the Democratic Party needs to, even the Democratic Party wanted to argue and say, Chris, that's not what we're saying at all. I think they have to understand why that is the perception of what they're saying.
Absolutely.
And think that through.
And I think we do have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, yeah, we are saying these things that we don't intend to be condescending. We don't intend to sound elitist, but to some perception we are. Right. And we need to fix that.
Yeah.
We need to let people know that we're in their corner. And my hope is that just by focusing on the simplistics of tax policy, government power, healthcare, everyday things, that I feel like we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
That my hope is we can allow people the option to see us as a friend and as an ally instead of someone who's pushing them around, looking down on them. Because I don't think that's what the Democratic Party is about. And I think that in frustration, many of, especially the liberal edge of us, have given off that persona. And I don't think it represents what we are as Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that.